Hi Mel, thank you so much for joining us today. You're on Legal Exchange with Henna. We're talking to Mel today about mental health. She has so much experience in this field. She's been an ex-lawyer, so she knows exactly what other lawyers go through. She's now a success coach, a mental health and well-being coach. She's been featured in loads of newspapers, including the Financial Times, Huff Post, and The Lawyer. And today she'll share her best tips for mental health with us today.
Thanks for that very complimentary intro, Hannah. How lovely.
No, thank you. It literally is who you are, and a lot
Oh,
more.
I know, it's quite nice to hear that back. I almost hadn't realised.
Amazing. So we'll start with, I know I've given you a bit of an introduction, but please tell our listeners a bit more about who you are, where you started, and a bit about your career journey.
Sure, Hannah, I'll give you a brief little summary. So I did an English literature and French degree at Birmingham Uni, loved it, quite creative. I'd always thought about law as one of a few career options, because I did relatively well in my degree, and my dad was like, you should give law a whirl, makes perfect sense. I thought, okay, it does make quite a lot of sense. So I tried out a few different internships like PR and commercial property. Neither were quite right. And then I was lucky to get a vacation scheme at Mishkondarea, which I really, really enjoyed. And I thought, hey, I'm looking forward to going into work. I really like the people. They're very charismatic. Who knew lawyers could be, quite fun and entrepreneurial. So I thought, yeah, I could see myself doing this, and then was lucky to be offered a training contract. So that's sort of how I got into law. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I went on to kind of work after that in a smaller family law firm, which was a startup set up by a pair from Withers. So that was interesting because they did very similar work, but kind of much cheaper, so much more affordable, so more diverse client base.
Okay.
So yeah, that was my path through law, and obviously I've since sort of pivoted in a different direction, which I'm happy to touch on if you'd like me to, or perhaps you just want to hear about the law.
No, we'd love to know what you do now.
Sure. So obviously you've given a great intro, Henna. So really, I mean, I really enjoyed law. It's a funny one. The main reason why I left is really because I wanted more work-life balance, which isn't to say that you can't have that in law, but I tended to find that my friends who had that maybe worked in the smaller firms or more kind of regional firms.
Mm-hmm.
And at that sort of stage and age, I was very keen on sort of staying in London. And I was also lucky to have grown up with an amazing dad who's a successful entrepreneur. So I think from a young age, I'd always kind of aspired to have that freedom and control over my work life,
Yeah.
and to maybe do something a little bit more creative. So I remember reading an article about coaching, and it was a bit like, when you meet your soulmate, you're like, ding, this is it. Oh my goodness, felt really excited, sparks were flying. And I thought, okay, I can use the things that I loved about law, like, meeting new people, helping them through big changes in life, which inevitably comes with vulnerability, maybe in a slightly more sort of diverse and creative context with better hours. And I'd also looked back on my sort of motivations for law and my experiences, particularly in family law. And although I really enjoyed the law because I'm quite, analytical and academic, like a lot of lawyers, I'd realized that maybe the main impetus was actually the kind of really human side, the emotions and the complexities that come with big changes like divorce,
Yeah.
sort of property changes, financial changes, changes with your children, your relationships. Because when I'd looked at law and family law, I'd always had this sort of potential vision in my mind of doing family law with a view to being a marriage counsellor. So I
Okay.
think underneath it, perhaps my why was to make a difference to people. And I think, like a lot of us, when we're young, we don't necessarily know what our values are, what we need to be happy, and to feel our most sort of balanced selves. And I think what I learned from being in my sort of experience of law was work-life balance and having time, whether it's just time for the sake of spending time with your family and friends, or time to have fun, or time to date, was very important to me. So yeah, in essence, coaching sort of satisfied my kind of strengths and my interests, but within more kind of work-life balance. And in terms of how the coaching panned out, I do a lot of career coaching. So I help people who are quite confused about what they want to do. They might be graduates, they might be in jobs, they might be older people who have been in work for a number of years. Within that, obviously life coaching is woven into that. And then I've also diversified into delivering mental health first aid workshops to companies and wellbeing workshops, including law firms, which I think we're going to have a chat about. So yeah, really, really enjoy both. Obviously the workshops are working with groups and helping to kind of improve organizational effectiveness, essentially. And obviously coaching is very much one-to-one. So that's what I do in a nutshell, Henna.
That sounds so interesting. I love what you do.
Thank you.
Another thing to think of that.
It sounds great, doesn't it? It's very diverse and varied, and I'm constantly learning, which is nice.
Oh, that is nice. I think that goes so well with our second point, because the legal profession struggles so much with mental health, and it's one of those unspoken things.
Mm,
I know, you know, you've done a few articles where you talk about mental health in the legal profession, and the figures are just horrendous. Why do
yeah.
you think people in the legal profession struggle so much with mental health?
That's an excellent question, Henna. And as you say, sadly, the figures are quite horrendous. So just to give, your listeners some context, in terms of the worst industry for mental health issues, it's construction. So the suicide rates, unfortunately, are sky high. It's quite
Mm,
male dominated, and see men find it harder to open up.
yeah.
But law is also quite high as well. So we know that lawyers suffer with higher rates of depression, anxiety, problem drinking, perfectionism, and
Mm,
inevitably suicide, which is essentially a culmination of quite common mental health issues that go unsupported usually. Well, I'd say, Hannah, which probably I'm sure you'd agree with, I'd
mm,
say there are a few factors really. Obviously, even at law school, there's a high level of pressure on students just to get a job in law. As you know, it's
yeah.
tough. Firstly, you've got to pass the exams, which are challenging. I mean, I did the GDL after my English and French degree, and it was really intense. So
Mm,
the work is innately challenging and complex. Um, there's a lot of reading. Um, so even before you got into law, that pressure is on, and then that standard of excellence continues when you're in law. And I think that's in essence what people really struggle with. And I could relate to that from my experience. You have to sort of be brilliant the whole time. You can't
yeah.
say to a high-paying client, "Sorry, I'm just having an off day. I'll send you that important letter of advice over in 2 days." So yeah, there's a time pressure. The clients are paying a lot of money. It's obviously a unique culture in that it's billable. The clock is ticking, and I think coupled with that, the nature of the work is innately complex.
Mm,
As I'm sure you can relate to, studying and working as you are. Um, so I think, yeah, the work is complex, the law is complex, it's ever changing. Um, and there's always that sort of slight fear, I think, with lawyers of negligence, of making a mistake. And that breeds, sometimes really unhealthy levels of perfectionism.
yeah.
And I find in my work that quite often, actually, my brightest clients, often the ones with the first class degrees and, the scholarships, are often the ones who struggle most with stress because their brains are so analytical and so brilliant. And that's what helps you excel as a lawyer. But it's also like your Achilles heel. It's also
Mhm.
where the kind of cracks start appearing. It's not sustainable, is it?
No.
And when you add into that sort of melting pot of pressure, life, as we know, Hannah, life happens, shit happens, adversity happens, breakups happen,
Yeah.
death happens, which we've seen all over the shop during COVID. How do you juggle both? It's very hard to be perfect when sometimes other parts of your life are challenging.
Mm.
So yeah, there are lots of life pressures that I think can tip people more into that sort of mental illness territory, alongside law. But even without those life pressures, I think the stresses are high, I would say.
So high, and I think all of that, it comes from almost your personality. A lot of lawyer personalities are very similar, and it's a bit like that added pressure to your personality makes it worse for you. What can you as
Totally.
an individual do to manage your well-being?
That's a very good question, Hannah. And I always preface this with law with it not being too patronizing, because non-lawyers will sort of be like, "Oh, don't work so hard," or, clock off earlier. But as you know, it's not always that simple, is it, when you've got clients and expectant partners at work and things. So in terms of the obvious point, try and improve work-life balance, there's an element of we need to be realistic about this, because sometimes it's hard. I think it depends on the area of law you're in. Obviously, if you're in something on the litigation side, it can be quite intense and sort of the moment, things need to be done now. If you're in something more transactional, you might have a bit less pressure, and a bit more kind of control over your workload. I'd say you can do some little things. You can control the controllables. So we've all struggled during COVID, haven't we, to kind of step away from our screens and have breaks. But I think just carving out time for short breaks away from your
Mhm.
desk, whether it's working from home or in the office, is really important, even if it's just a 10-minute walk around the block.
Yeah.
Getting moving, it tends to shift emotions positively. I also think, and this was a piece of advice I was given once from a partner I worked under, when you do have weekends and time off, try and have like 2 clear days wherever you can.
Okay.
Obviously, sometimes you might need to do a bit of work, in an evening, if you're on an important case or you have a demanding client. But I think trying to have 2 clear days away from work will really refresh your brain. And studies show that that's really, really important to performance. So it's not the case, as lots of lawyers and high achievers think, you know, if I do more work, I'll perform better. That's what the opposite is true. That's what leads to burnout. So really giving yourself time at the weekend to relax, and time in the evening away from your screen, you know, having some boundaries around your BlackBerry and your computer, and, you know, where you relax, whether it's your lounge or bedroom, I think is super, super important. And I'd also say, Hannah, I mean, it's an obvious one, but, you know, tuning into your stress levels is important. So in the mental health training that I run, we talk about the stress bucket. And it's a really nice way to think about our stress levels. So we all have a stress bucket, and it's a different size for all of us. So some people have a really large stress bucket, and that's what stress flows into. So if you've got a large space for stress to flow into, it takes longer to fill up. You're more resilient. Equally, some people have a smaller space for stress to flow into, so it fills up much faster. And that's sort of determined by lots of different factors, like 50% genetics, your environment, and beyond. So just becoming conscious of where your stress levels are in that bucket is important. And when you're feeling your stress levels really tipping to the top, where overflow happens and we start to feel stressed or anxious or depressed, it's quite helpful just to get out a piece of paper, write down everything that's stressing you out in your personal life and your home life. That tends to immediately affect a positive shift, people find. So write it all down. It's almost like vomiting your stress onto the paper. And then you can start managing that. So you can ask yourself some very handy questions like, what can I control here? That's the first one. What am I in control of? So you're focusing your mind only on the things you can control versus the things you can't. Then you can ask yourself some other questions like, what's the priority right now? You know, what sort of 4 things do I absolutely need to prioritize? And another question, who can help me with this? So just a nice way to try and manage those factors in your stress bucket. And at the bottom of your bucket, you have a little release valve. So if you're using that well, you're engaging in positive coping mechanisms. So the things that give you a bump in well-being. So for me, it might be like, you know, going out into nature, chatting to friends, eating delicious meals. So just engaging with what are those sort of 3 to 4 things that bulletproof my week. And how much of those am I doing? So when you feel wobbly or stressed, just engage with, have a little audit. Which of those am I doing and which am I neglecting? How can I just up those sort of positive coping mechanisms to boost my well-being and reduce those stress levels in my bucket? And equally checking in on the opposite. What negative coping mechanisms are really increasing and blocking this little stress release valve? So it might be drinking too much, not getting enough sleep. So controlling the controllables, like, you know, eating well, not boozing too much, going to bed as early as you can, getting out into the fresh air can be really, really helpful as well. That's a really simple one, I think, that is very easy to apply. And the other one that I found really helpful, Henna, in the legal space was, again, controlling the controllables. So, you know, most lawyers are perfectionists. They want to kind of, you know, be sort of doing their work really well all the time, and they're used to having big workloads. So if you have a lot of work on, don't be afraid to just check in with people. What is, just to double check, is that a hard deadline for this piece of work? Otherwise you might be ramming all this extra work in when, for all you know, you might have an extra 4 days and it's not urgent. And so that's one thing, checking in with deadlines. Another thing obviously is, depending on your seniority, delegating where you can. You know, again, perfectionists often want to do it all ourselves, don't we? So seeing where you can delegate work, that's obviously going to reduce the work levels. And the other one is that lovely line, I would really love to help you, but I really want to do this work well, and I really feel I'm at capacity right now. And if I take this on right now and the deadline is, you know, X or Tuesday, I may not be able to do this to my optimum. So, you know, if you start any piece of honest feedback with a positive, like that, it's usually well received. So don't be afraid to try and manage people's expectations and create some sort of boundary where you can.
And it's so important. I think I learned this quite late. Like, I've only started to say no to extra work this year, but it's been really good to just say, just before taking on extra work, looking at your to-do list, if you've already got too much and you're pushing yourself, you're gonna, even doing the work, you're gonna feel like that isn't the best work I could do, which will affect your mental health. And you're gonna be overworking yourself, longer hours, sitting in one place for longer, and not, you know, going through all the things that you talked about. Hobbies are so important. I think we neglect them because you just think that's not going to bring anything to my career, but actually it is.
I totally agree. It's so important to, it sounds so cliche, but it's so important to reconnect to the authentic you outside work. like a lot of my career coaching clients naturally are very fixated on sorting their careers. Naturally, not having that sorted is incredibly stressful. But actually, sometimes when people are overwhelmed, it's good to step back and, like you say, Hannah, engage with something completely outside your work or
Yeah.
career, whatever it may be, whether it's, going to the cinema or going on a run or trying something new.
Yeah, totally agree. So
Mm.
all of that is so good, and I think it'll help whoever listens to this so much on how they can be accountable for their mental health and
Yeah,
well-being.
absolutely. And obviously,
Okay.
Hannah, everyone's very different. Like some people are big fans of meditation. Studies show that it does affect this, it helps us manage our stress.
Yeah.
I'm quite a big fan of Insight Timer. It's a really good app. It's the world's biggest free meditation app. It's
Okay.
really lovely. You can literally Google the emotion you're feeling, whether it's heartache, heartbreak, anxiety, stress, and you get to choose from lots of lovely free meditations. And it really does help starting your day off with just, 10 minutes lying in bed before you've
Mm.
even got up, just, listening to that. And it puts you in a really sort of grounded space. So yeah, lots of different things that people can do. But yeah, meditation and even journaling, having a space to, bit like the stress bucket exercise, to kind of
Yeah.
vomit out your emotions onto paper. I'm sure that you've done this, Hannah, I can imagine. Have you?
Yeah.
Yeah. You seem very evolved, so I was making that wild assumption about you. Yeah, just having a space to sort of just write down stream of consciousness how you're feeling. It's important to share emotions, whether it's with
Mm.
other people, just sharing that you're stressed,
Yeah.
or onto paper. And that really, when you reflect on that, even just like a couple of days later or a week or 2 weeks later, you can be surprised by what you learn about yourself and the insights you have. Like, God, I
Mm.
was actually really stressed. I need to
Yeah.
really engage with that and do something differently.
And to not, and it's okay sometimes not to be okay. I think so a
Totally.
lot of us are so nervous and scared of just owning up to, actually, I've had a hard day, or I don't know how to manage this. And it's okay to speak
Hmm.
on about that.
Totally, Henna. And I know that us two were talking briefly about, therapy and things before
Yeah.
chatting. And, it's so important. It's such an obvious one. That's why the rate of suicide is so high in construction, because men don't talk.
No.
And that's why we have 75% of suicides being male
Yeah.
versus, obviously 25% female, because men don't share, which really
Mm.
brings home the importance of talking, whether it's to, a good friend who's a good listener or a therapist. It's so important to, yeah, express our emotion and to learn good coping mechanisms for, yeah, being our optimum, really.
Yeah.
The other one I'd really recommend, Hannah, for anyone listening, and I won't go into it too much here, is cognitive behavioral therapy. So
Okay.
that's used to support people with mild to moderate depression or anxiety. But I think it's an amazing life tool for everyone,
Okay.
because what it's about basically learning how to identify distortions that in our minds that really stress us out.
Mm.
Very common ones like catastrophizing. We all catastrophize, don't we? If I don't do this work, or if I do this badly, I might lose my job, or my boss will think I'm terrible. It might be doing an amazing presentation that's 99% superb and maybe 1% isn't ideal. And
Mm.
rather than thinking that was great, you start thinking, that was really bad, oh my gosh, what will people think? So we all catastrophize, we all think negatively. These are what we call distortions. So learning how to recognize those and manage them with helpful questions, which I won't really go into now, can be life-changing. And if anyone's interested in learning more about that, there's an amazing online course called Beating the Blues. And a
Okay.
couple of my super bright kind of lawyer type clients have done that. And all I can say is there's been like a transformational 360 very quickly.
Oh.
So if you find that you have kind of negative thought patterns, which we all do, and they're really keeping you stuck and
Mm.
causing you stress or distress sometimes, CBT is a game changer.
Okay, I'll definitely recommend that. I'll make sure CBT is one of the highlights when I post this. So we've learned through what as a person you can do, but our lives, I sometimes spend more time at work than I do doing anything.
Yeah.
And how can, our employers help us more with mental health, especially during COVID, when they can't see how you're feeling. At
Yeah.
work, I think it was a bit easier to just tap on someone's shoulder and be like, "You seem low," or "You seem a bit different. Is everything okay?" But with
Yeah.
COVID, how can this support us?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Hannah, especially the COVID point, because obviously, as you say, you're not in the same place. So I think
Mhm.
the first thing is, I think when you have Zoom calls and things, I think it's quite important that people have their cameras on,
Mhm.
because you can infer a lot from someone's voice and you can hear
Mhm.
shifts potentially, but you get more of a sense of someone from seeing their face. So as you said, Hannah, you're obviously tuned into this subject. the key difference between stress and mental illness is really spotting shifts in someone's norms that last for at least 2 weeks. So for example, to get a diagnosis of depression versus someone just feeling low, having a bad day, you need to have been feeling down more than up for at least 2 weeks. And some of the giveaways are exactly what you said, Henna. It's looking out for shifts in people's norms. So let's say, obviously, you're quite a bubbly person on first impressions. Let's say you became really kind of withdrawn and quiet, and you didn't want your camera on, and you just started to sort of not talk, openly, and you didn't seem as positive, then that would be potentially alarming for an employer. So what they're looking for, really, what they should be doing is looking out for shifts in people's norms. So it might be someone bubbly becoming withdrawn. It might be someone who's normally quite introverted becoming quite over the top and very, very talkative, sending lots and lots of emails late at night, or being ill and not being present on work calls, or potentially the opposite. So that's presenteeism, where you're working really long hours, maybe sending lots of emails while you're on holiday. Probably not happening much at the moment, sadly. So how can you manage this? Have your camera on, take a proactive interest in your employees. So I would say checking in, it's hard time-wise sometimes for managers, but checking in with employees on an individual basis, ideally at least once every 2 weeks, and really actively taking a curious interest in their personal lives. How's everything going? How's your family doing? What are the main stresses in your life right now? What's the main stress for you at work? If I could wave a magic wand and help you with one thing, what would it be? Like, proactively ask open questions. Because for all you know, as we know, Henna, COVID, all sorts of problems, homeschooling, people being ill, bereavement, maybe property problems, if people, having to move house because of money issues. So proactively asking how, is there anything I can help with? It might be that they say, could I work more flexible hours because I'm having to homeschool my children and my husband's working really long hours at the moment. It might be that, someone in their family's in hospital with COVID and they're feeling really anxious and they can't concentrate. So actively taking an interest in people's personal lives is really, really important. And I think also, Henna, on even on team calls, I think something that can be quite effective, which I've heard through people in my workshops, is it's quite powerful when managers share a bit of vulnerability. So they open up about what's stressing them out. It could be, I don't know about you guys, but I'm finding this case, it's keeping me up at night and it's affecting my well-being a bit. And it's a tough time. How are you guys coping? Can anyone relate to that? So showing a bit of vulnerability makes it okay for other people to do the same. And maybe people can share, what's working for you, what's helping you. Just sort of, as we said again, sharing and talking is very, very important. And as you said, Henna, it's okay not to be okay. Normalizing stress is key before it kind of bubbles up in that stress bucket and overflows. Even checking in with those other questions, like the stress bucket questions. Okay, so we're all feeling, the pressure at the moment. What are you guys doing to boost your well-being? What are your positive coping mechanisms? Has anyone discovered a great meditation app, or perhaps someone would volunteer an amazing online fitness app that they're using that's really given them a boost? So I think, normalizing those discussions about stress is very important, and checking in with those regularly, individually, and on work calls. And I think as well, obviously, as you know, I do mental health first aid training, and this isn't even like a sales pitch really, but it's all very well giving these high level kind of top tips, but these courses are amazing because what they do is they actually teach people how to spot the signs and symptoms of very common conditions like depression and anxiety and beyond. And 1 in 4 of us, way more than that actually, is going to struggles with that every year in the UK, and obviously that's skyrocketed now during COVID. So what that sort of training does is it teaches all sorts of stakeholders, not just managers, how to spot signs and symptoms, how to proactively start conversations, how to reactively respond when you're worried about someone, and how to signpost them to professional help, because we're not taught this stuff at school and it's very stressful. Not knowing how to support colleagues, and it can be also quite detrimental to business, of course. So that would be my recommendation, really.
And if people do want to find you, how can they find you?
So they can find me in lots of different ways. So I'm on Instagram under Melanie Pritchard Coaching. And then I have a website, so that's melanie-pritchard.com. Those are the main 2 ways to find me, I think. And I've got a blog on my website as well, and I have a podcast on there if anyone's interested in all things well-being.
Yeah, for sure. I think that'll be so good to listen to, and I can't wait to listen to more of you and have more chats. Thank you so much for joining us today. This was...
You're most welcome, Henna. It was
Lovely
a
to meet
pleasure.
you, and I look forward to what 2021 brings us.
Absolutely, me too. Let's hope it's the only way is up.
I don't think there's a way down.
Yeah, I hope not, Hannah.